And so for all of you who are here with us today, I'm sure you have been in a meeting or two that has not been great, or you've been in a meeting that has been great. And so my first question actually for you and I to get started, John, what are the most common root causes of mediocre and unproductive meetings?
It's a classic question. Why is this meeting unproductive? Why is it not going well? I think a lot of it starts with agendas. And so, as folks were signing up for even this meeting and in this session, there was an agenda of here's what we're going to cover today, right? So you got a really good sense of why should I go? Why should I even be there? So that's kind of the starting place. Is if there's not an agenda with a clear outcome of what we're trying to do in that meeting, it makes it a really big hill to climb to make that meeting productive to begin with. Got several others, but I'll pass it back to you and see if there are any at the top of your list there.
I would say one of my most biggest pet peeves in this is if a meeting has participants only. So I'll reframe it slightly and explain a bit what I mean. But I think there's often an idea that there is someone who owns the meeting, in the sense they're the person who sends the calendar invite. Ideally, they also set up an agenda. And everyone else kind of shows up as participants. It's typically also in a calendar. It's typically also labeled that way. But I found that one of the easiest ways for a meeting to go downhill very fast is if everyone is just a participant, as in expecting either the person who's running the thing or just everyone else to make the meeting useful and to make it worthwhile.
Yeah,
that's what
it all comes back to, is there pre-work that we need to do for this meeting? Is there a pre-read that we should come prepared with? You have the Amazon way of doing it, which is we're going to sit in this meeting together and read the memo and then talk about the memo. It's one way to force people to do it, but that pre-work going into the agenda and telling people, hey, here's exactly what I need from you to show up, and then really dialing in on who are the key players that should be there. That's a big mistake I see a lot of people make, is we have meeting theater or a spectator sport of, hey, let's get 12 people in the room. 3 people are going to talk. Everybody else just sit there. Try to trim that list as much as you can and get down to really who can make decisions, who can impact the meeting, and who's going to help drive that to some sort of good outcome.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really good call out, that there are so many different purposes of meetings, and it might be worth for us to capture those at least a little bit, because I do think politics and the spectator sport that you called out, they're not necessarily always productive purposes, but they are purposes that exist a lot in corporate environments. Even being invited to a certain meeting often equals almost a promotion in many organizations. So on the more maybe productive front, I would say there are meetings that are used for making a decision or gathering ideas from people. What other sort of more productive or unproductive reasons for having meetings have you seen?
Yeah, I think the decision-making meeting is a big one. So, cross-collaboratively, we need to come together and decide on something. We may have some async work that we do in the short term, whether that's document creation, brainstorming, but really all getting in the same room, hashing through here are the decisions or multiple options for decisions that we have. And then one of the things that I've done in the past and had a CEO recommend is having everyone go around the room and say aligned when you get to the time for a decision. It's this is the decision we're making. And then you go around the room, everybody that is there has to say aligned. If someone is not aligned, then you spend the rest of the time trying to hash out, why are we not aligned? How do we get there? But that way, in that decision, especially if it's an emotional one, right, we are able to get on the same page. Everybody has signed off at that point and said, we're good to go with this decision. We're ready to move forward. So decision making is a good meeting topic. You'll have your standard agile ceremonies as well. We could go on and on about that in a whole separate session. But I think the stand-ups, the retros, the planning, those are all valuable, productive meetings. Just matters how you get into it, how you plan it, how you prep it, and then how you show up.
Yeah. And we'll dive into that, I think, a lot today. Yeah, I did in, I think, the last edition of Tech Leadership Tuesday, and everyone who's here as well maybe remember, but I learned about Taco Agile. So titles and ceremonies only. I was not familiar with that acronym before.
I learned something new today as well then. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, someone who was in the attendees, among the attendees, had thrown that in, and yeah, I think we may also debug a little bit of Taco Agile today, at least the ceremonies aspect.
Sounds good.
So how do you decide when a topic truly needs a synchronous meeting versus when it could be an email, a shared doc, a chat thread?
Yeah, so I mentioned the emotional aspect of meetings, especially in remote environments. It can be very easy to read into text too much. Can be very easy to add tone to a message that you were sent when really none was intended. It's like, oh, they sent a weird emoji. What does that mean? So at times where it's an emotional topic, that is especially when I try to bring folks into the room. If I see a conversation going on past 10 replies in a thread, I'm probably going to say, hey, let's hop on a call and discuss this. So there are ad hoc variations of that to make sure we're not talking past each other. But then for brainstorming, if it's a collaborative brainstorming where we have no idea where we're going and we want to get in a room, kind of go through a board and say, let's add all of our ideas here, then we'll consolidate. Let's architect this decision together. Let's build a workflow diagram. Sometimes it's better to do that ahead of time if you know the solution. But if you don't know the solution, brainstorming can be a really good time to get together and start working through that. Department meetings, another good time to get together. Those probably fewer and further between. But if you have information that you need to share out to the entire company, financials, quarterly reports, things along those lines, it can be helpful to do that just so everyone has the same information at the same time instead of, well, Gary read this, but Beth didn't read it. And Susan read all of it and has a lot of questions, but now it's an asynchronous doc where we have to try and work through all those together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are great examples. And what I would add is anything that has to do with building alignment. I think the department meetings you mentioned can be a good example for that as well. But and that also includes, for example, syncs with your peers as a leader, even conversations with your boss about how do we get things done, because I've often found that it's so easy to feel like you're on the same page, even from reading things in a document or from chatting about something, but then actually talking through, well, how will we do this? What will it mean? Looking at different perspectives and then probably realizing, oh, we actually thought something entirely different was going to happen between just the two of us. So that's like the alignment piece. And the last one I would add is relationship building. And I think that's one that's very easily underutilized by a lot of leaders. That's really you go for a coffee with someone, or you have a 20-minute just chat if you're working remotely, where you try and get to know the other person, not just as a leader or as a coworker, but also as the person that they are, to the degree that they're willing to share things. But that time, it may feel like it's not the most productive meeting in the sense that there isn't an output, there isn't an artifact that you're sharing after that. Yeah. But that time is often one of the best investments you can make, especially as you're moving upwards in the organization, because you're getting more exposure, you're building trust with people, you're getting visibility, and that is ultimately going to be a big vehicle for getting stuff done.
Yeah, there's a tool called Donut that, especially in Slack, you can add Donut and it just creates random meetings for you and people that you haven't talked to. So when you were mentioning the building the personal relationships, that's the tool that I thought of. And yeah, one-on-ones especially. Yeah. It's like I really don't ever want one-on-ones to be async. Like, yes, you can do the prep work, you can add a document or whatever, but yeah, you should always have that face-to-face time, even if it's remote, of working together and carving out that space, because that can be super beneficial for both of you.
Yeah. So I will say, I've worked with a lot of clients these days. One of the first things I do with them is either meeting bankruptcy or at least a big audit of their calendar. Yep. So how do you, for people who are here today who either want to do this for themselves or who are getting questions from their team members in terms of, hey, I think I have too many unnecessary meetings, how do you recommend that leaders conduct a kind of meeting audit to decide which meetings to cut, to fix, or to keep?
I love that you brought up the meeting bankruptcy. That's been a good trend, and I think it is like even quarterly meeting bankruptcy, just clear them all off. Like the ones that need to stay will come back.
Quarterly, nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
If it loves you, it will come back. That's
right.
my philosophy.
I think it was Shopify that built software for their internal systems to it was some sort of chaos monkey that would go in, and any recurring meeting that had more than 4 individuals on it would scrape those out every couple of months. And I thought the aspect of it being automated was a little spooky, but I think the thought and the base of it is really good, which is look at your recurring meetings first and determine who's in here, what is my cost. And when I talk about cost, it's not just the salaries in the room. It is the productivity cost, the time cost, and then the output cost, right? If I wasn't in this meeting, what could I be doing instead? And so those 4 factors for me, that's what I tend to look at for every recurring meeting to understand, is this helpful for me? And when I'm still not sure at that point, I ask myself, what is the intended outcome? Do we hit that a majority of the time? If there is an expected outcome and we rarely get to it, it's probably not an effective meeting. And so that's why I start to try and chip away. Now, wouldn't try to do that with your boss's meetings or your manager's meetings, but it can be a good topic of conversation. Is, hey, I'm in this meeting over and over again. I feel like it's not as productive as it could be. Do you feel like it's one that we still need, or is there something that we can do better in this meeting to drive to better outcomes? So yeah, it really comes down to, I'll say the scorched earth route as well. Like sometimes I'll just nuke a meeting and just say like, okay, I'm pulling this one off the calendar. If somebody really wants it, they'll be like, hey, what happened to that one? And it'll come back and be like, oh, yep, I'm just doing some cleanup. No one has ever been like, how dare you? how dare you delete this and test me? Yeah. So it can be a good conversation topic, and especially for those relationship building meetings, like which meetings are ineffective, and then talking about in retros too, to understand what are we doing right now that is not working well? How can we make it better, or should we just get rid of it altogether? So it's a lot of just being introspective and reflective with your teams to understand that, yeah, this isn't as helpful as it used to be.
And that's, I think, that like the deterioration timeline of meetings and the half-life that they tend to have when they're recurring, I think it's a really good call out. Yeah, I think one piece I wanted to call out is that all of this is like for everyone here who's already a senior leader or an executive. If you do this, like a lot of your organization will be very grateful, because this like the meeting audits are infinitely harder to do when you're at a lower end of the org, or when you're an IC even, because there's often so much power involved in like who gets to call a meeting or who gets to say, well, we don't need this meeting anymore, and not even the theatrics that we alluded to earlier. But so I think, good for you doing this. One other tool that I've quite liked is I'm a spreadsheets person, so that may not be for everyone, but I like to do a calendar audit occasionally, where I pull my meetings and turn them into categories between sort of how do I spend my time with people who are in my org versus peers versus people who are either like above me in the organization or who are like outside, for example, like clients, or they're like in the sales department, for example. And I found that really valuable as a way to just see how I spend my time. So that's even the step before we're starting to remove meetings, yeah. Which I also think is a really good one to do. But I found getting a gauge for, like, for example, when I moved into senior leadership positions, I would still spend too much time operationally focused, and that was very visible in my meetings. Like I would have too many meetings with people in my org versus with peers or people who were like outside of my direct organization. And so that alone can also be a really good gauge for are you actually operating at the right level? So that's where meetings can also be a helpful indicator for what kind of leader you are.
Yeah, the categorization piece I think is super helpful. It is, especially as you're rising through a company, reminding yourself of who your first team is, and then understanding, are you spending that time with your first team, or as you mentioned, sometimes it's not letting go of the things that we're supposed to let go or delegate. And so that delegation can even be super helpful when you look at the entirety of your scope of meetings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I will say that at least most people I've worked with, and also me, never spend enough time with their first team because it's really hard to do. But
yep.
So,
yeah. It's agreed.
I want to pull in a question that we got. So the question is, what are the hallmarks for you of awesome large group meetings?
Interesting.
I'll let you take that first.
Yeah, I'm so curious the context. Like, what sort of meeting are we trying to have? I'll try to speak about it a bit generally, since we're not super clear on that. But I think large meetings, if it's supposed to be interactive, make that clear at the beginning of how you're going to engage with everyone. If you play any tabletop role playing games, like you have like the game master, you kind of have to do that in a meeting. And so you are the one that's responsible for making sure you're drawing out the quiet folks, who a lot of times they have the most to contribute, but they may not be good in a large setting. And so it's trying to figure out, okay, how do we engage with everyone? How do I draw them out and kindly quiet the really loud voices? Because it's a tough thing to do. In terms of the actual presentation, I like to send things out ahead of time, just so folks can read ahead and also understand, ask more questions. That way I'm not just reading from slides. I find that a lot of big meetings, people are just reading from slides. Everybody zones out, especially remote or even in person. They're on their phones and not paying attention. And so they're not engaging, and you're not getting as much impact out of that meeting as you could. Having Slido is a popular tool that you can use and interject into your meeting throughout this. As you have questions, toss those in there, similar to how we're doing Q&A today. And let's see what questions we have to really drive that engagement and make sure that folks are paying attention. And then react Gs. So I've used these in the webinars for O'Reilly that I've done. Is, if you feel the same way, like, give me a heart emoji. Or if you've ever facilitated a meeting, you're like, that was really bad, like, add a laughing emoji. So trying to find those interjections of how can I pull them in to engage instead of just talking at them in a large setting.